Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this session hosted by the GEF and the GCF and the Wildlife Conservation Society. And it's a topic that's very relevant to this discussion going on elsewhere here today on financing 30 by 30. And the question particularly, given the complex financial situation in the world today, and especially given that 2/3 of low-income countries and 1/3 of middle-income countries are already either in debt distress or approaching debt distress, which means that it's difficult for them to scrape together enough money for their debt servicing, let alone for investments in food security, health, and education. How can these countries pay for their commitments and aspirations for 30 by 30? And in particular, they have no space to take on more loans. And so we've brought together a group of people today to talk about options, so innovative combinations of financial instruments, how debt itself could be an opportunity, not just a challenge, but an opportunity for financing, as well as other innovative non-debt instruments that could be scaled in combination with debt instruments or not to support countries. And WCS is developing a large proposal to the GCF to support countries, particularly least developed countries and African countries, for their commitments and aspirations for 30 by 30, and looking for other co-financing. Some countries have expressed an interest in using some of their STAR allocations as co-financing, but the difference in the way that we're approaching this proposal is as a program and a co-finance platform. So it's not just about biodiversity, but really looking for a set of places that maximize co-benefits for biodiversity, mitigation, and adaptation of both ecosystems and people. And doing this in partnership with Indigenous people and local communities. So with that as the introduction, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our first speaker, Heike Hen, who is the Director of Climate, Energy and Environment at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation, and she is also the Commissioner for Climate Policy and Climate Financing. She will give us some of her perspective on options, and in particular, I asked her to talk about some of Germany's investments and aspirations on insurance, climate risk insurance, such as INSU Resilience and the Global Climate Shield, and how those instruments could help scale some non-debt instruments to be able to support investments like 30 by 30.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Good morning, everybody. It's really great to see so many key players and partners in the discussion we are having right now in Montreal. And my boss actually is part of the stocktake, and he says hi, and unfortunately cannot be here due to his role as facilitator. And I think the topic of the panel is really, of the event, is spot on, at the heart of the discussion. I mean, how to finance an ambitious and robust framework, and really put the relevant instruments, partners together to tackle the challenge between biodiversity, climate, and the SDGs. Because neither the 30 by 30 nor the rest, the 70% sustainable land use, we can realize without avoiding the different trade-offs and getting really it right for people and the planet. And I think, Sandy, you also were talking about the multiple crises that are hitting countries and people and are really shrinking the fiscal space. And countries have to have difficult decisions on where to put their money on. I think Valerie was also talking about it the other day. And really tough decisions between social services for the poorest groups of society versus nature, environment, climate. And we have to bring it together and make it like one good program and investment with many co-benefits. So a couple of challenges, but I think there are a couple of key partners for solutions on the panel and in the room. And I think it's certainly about public funds, and Germany wants to be a ambitious partner in this, but it's also about private actors that bring not only money, but also a different perspective to the table. And of course, multilateral institutions like the World Bank, GEF, our host, and GCF, who already are key and are there and are able and capable to find solutions, and I guess willing to do more and reform, even to become better on serving all of us and client countries on global public goods. So I think what we can do, and Germany also aims to do, is to take up the reform spirit that I think is there in specifically addressing more the institutional and structural challenges that the financial landscape has right now. So it was part of the cover decision in Sharm el-Sheikh. People are talking about the Bridgetown agenda, about wise minds, about MDB reform for global public goods, and the US, Germany, and others were instrumental in this. So there's really a broader discussion to work within the existing landscape of the existing financial architecture, and make it even better fit for purpose for our global challenges. And we try to be a partner in this. Okay, we provide public funds, and we were very happy that our Chancellor announced that we will increase our biodiversity spending until 2025 to 1.5 billion. But from my perspective, it's not only about money, it's also about creating innovative and ambitious partnerships, creating new instruments, forging, I don't know, ambitious partnerships for nature with countries, and then bringing in philanthropies and others to back up what we can do on the policy side of things, doing more about de-risking together with the multilaterals. And I think we announced yesterday the BSUP Accelerator Partnership. This is also something helping, supporting countries in implementing what we hopefully will decide here. So really to have the key investments that then pay into implementation fast. And in this respect, we also look at the loss and damage discussion, or rather prearranged financing. I mean, we know that we have multiple crises and the climate crisis is here to stay. We know that climate impacts are going to hit countries and will shrink the fiscal space even further. So the most efficient thing we can do in the ratio of 1 to 5 is have prearranged financing. That can be insurance, that can be social safety nets. It can also be, and talking about the Bridgetown agenda, climate loan clauses that just pause the payback of interest for 2 years or 3 years, so that countries have fiscal space to invest in nature, to come back, recover better and greener after a climate impact, a disaster. So I think really innovative leveraging instruments that widen the fiscal space is really key. And we are here, and that is my last sentence, to work really with GCF, with GEF, with the MDBs. And let me state it again, we think the GEF is absolutely fit for purpose. It's the fund that is already under the convention and is delivering for biodiversity and people. We are a partner to work with the GEF even more in the future. Sorry for taking so long.
Thank you, Heike. I'm going to now introduce Joe Walston, who's my colleague at WCS, Executive Director of Global Conservation, and he's going to moderate the rest of this session. And before we bring up the panel, I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask Heike a few questions because in case she gets pulled away into something else. So,
thank you very much, Sandy. So, any questions for Heike? Thank you very much, Heike. That was fantastic. Because, as I said, it is an incredibly busy day, and we're very grateful for yourself, but all the attendees today. Hopefully, it sounds like we're making progress on a number of fronts. But if there are no questions for anyone, we will thank Heike again as well, and the German government for its incredible commitment across a range of different mechanisms that it is making both to biodiversity and to communities. And I'd ask the panel, we're extremely lucky to in joining Heike today on 3 individuals. I'd like to ask Yannick Glenarek, who is the head of executive director of the Green Climate Fund, if he could join us on stage, and also Christian Samper, my ex-boss, so I have to be very polite, but now the managing director of the Bezos Earth Fund for Nature Solutions. I'm going to allow and ask, first of all, Yannick to maybe start with, where am I taking your seat? No, I'm not even going to give Valerie any chance of any excuse. Valerie Hickey is the Global Director of Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy at the World Bank, and a very old colleague. Valerie, please. Yeah. So that was a lesson learned. So I'm trying not to block Valerie. But we have here today, again, 3 extremely important both institutions and individuals within those institutions who are driving a lot of the progress and debate and discussions over how we coordinate more efficiently and effectively around both delivering on the CBD objectives, raising the ambitions of the global framework now, and really their systems are delivering at this stage at scale. And it's a coordination we're really looking for today, and I'm going to be asking people about that coordination between their various mechanisms. So I'd like to first start with each of the panelists who are going to do a few minutes of introduction to those, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions. But if I could ask Yannick to say a few comments on behalf of the Green Climate Fund. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I will maybe say a few words about the Green Climate Fund and after try to deep dive on the title of this event, Depth for Nature, Climate and People. The Green Climate Fund, our mandate is to help countries accelerate their just energy, infrastructure, ecological, full system transitions toward climate resilient, net zero, nature positive economies. We about 30% of our overall programming support biodiversity objectives. mostly when it comes to food system transition and ecological transition, but also even in energy and infrastructure. And it's 30% is more or less what science tell us about what should be the share of nature-based and ecosystem-based approaches when it comes to climate change. The Green Climate Fund is capital agnostic and is a partnership organization. Capital agnostic, we are capitalized in grant, but we can use any kind of grant and non-grant instruments. We can convert our grants in extension of tenors, in insurances, guarantees, private equity investment, etc. And the partnership organization, we work with more than 200 accredited and delivery partners from some of the largest commercial banks in the world, such as HSBC, Deutsche Bank, or BNP Paribas, to agencies working at the community level, civil society organization. And we work also with all the MDBs and close to 40 NDBs. When it comes to nature-based solution, we started working quite a lot with relatively traditional grant and debt instruments. And we have been increasingly exploring new forms of blended finance to make it work much better for adaptation and nature-based solution. I think it's fair to say that the conventional blended finance works very well for mature technologies in mature markets, much less for nascent technologies in nascent market. And we discovered that actually private equity investment, insurances, guarantees could be extremely efficient to catalyze very large financial flows in LDCs and seeds. And so I would like to give one example of a private equity fund before moving to debt, so that we do not look at debt as the only instrument, even if it's a huge instrument. For example, one thing we did last year was to finance a 500 private equity fund for coral reef protection. This equity fund will invest in sustainable aquaculture, sustainable mariculture, ecosystem, ecotourism, productive use of kelp forests. To reassure institutional investors, we have provided $125 million of first loss private equity. We are the first to lose our money. If it works, we will get back our money. But much more importantly, we will have demonstrated that investing in coral reef management is a legitimate investment, which means that when you and we go to see our banker, we can say, I want 5% or 10% of my savings to be invested in protecting coral reef, because we will have created a new asset class. And once you have created an asset class, you shift monies by the hundreds of billions of dollars. And so they are instruments that can really move the needles. In terms of debt, we have seen it's one of the greatest innovation of the last 15 years that has enabled to keep the window of opportunity open to avoid catastrophic climate change is green bond. If my memory is correct, the first green bond was issued by EIB in 2007. World Bank? Was issued by World Bank in 2007. And it exceeded $1 trillion in 2021. But first, Africa accounts for less than 1% of this issuance, 0.077%, if my memory is correct. And second, a lot of these bonds are mostly involved in renewable energy infrastructure, rather than in nature, climate, and people. And so what we are doing right now is trying to find how we can better capitalize on the debt market for nature, climate, and people. And with the Inter-American Development Bank, we established $600 million for the Bio-Amazon Fund. And there we are providing credit line to eco-businesses, to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Credit line that's the traditional debt mechanism, and from the MDB to local banks. But it's established a commercial track record. It shows whether it can work or not, whether it's legitimate or not. Once again, it's create a new asset class, which is eco-businesses at the community level. And if the project is successful, we will basically help in issuing green bonds for eco businesses in the Amazon. And to issue these green bonds on our side, we will use the fact that we are capital agnostic to provide guarantees and access and maybe get a double A rating for a bond. And I don't want to take more time, but we are right now exploring half a dozen of a similar issuance of bonds for marine protected areas or other key terrestrial biomes, where to make it an option, first, we developed a track record. Second, we come with credit enhancement for the bond, and it can include guarantees. It can include debt reserve account. It can include insurances and reinsurances, etc. So I believe we are at the dawn of a very, very interesting period where we could maybe provide access to long-term affordable finance to those that need the most if we are willing to explore new approaches.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's working. That's fantastic. To save time, nobody wants to listen to me. I'm going to go straight on to Christian now from the Bezos Earth Fund. And what we're going to do is we're going to listen to each of our panelists first, and then we're going to come back to you and allow some Q&A after that. But Christian.
Right. Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. And I think this is a very timely panel, as a couple of the others we've been on, because whatever's decided in the next 2 days, we need to get on and implement it. And that's a key issue. It's working with countries, working with local communities, and it's looking at how we can all work together around this. And needless to say, finance is going to be a really important part of this, but not the only piece here. We need to build capacity, training, so many other aspects here. But I think this is a key issue. We know personally our view from the Bezos Earth Fund has been that certainly the 30 by 30 target done in the right way, in the right places, with the right people is one of the core elements of this. So we've gone behind it. And mobilizing this, it's going to be critical clearly for people, nature, planet, all the issues you probably all know. I'm not going to go over them. But I completely agree with Yannick. I mean, we need a whole range of instruments here. I think Green Climate Fund has done a great job exploring issues, bringing in private equity, so many others, stakeholders in here. I represent here the private philanthropy side, and several of you have been at other events know that we made a year ago a pledge that we would invest $1 billion of the philanthropy specifically to support the implementation of 30 by 30. But not only that, but we actually partnered with 10 other philanthropies, and we've made a public statement a year ago, and we reiterated here that we will invest $5 billion in private philanthropy specifically to support the implementation of 30 by 30. But it's just not only a pledge. As a matter of fact, this year alone, we've already invested more than $600 million. So money is really going out the door and helping this. And it is in key geographies. The way we're trying to do this is by forming coalitions in different parts of the world, Congo Basin, Tropical Andes, Eastern Tropical Pacific, and co-financing, aligning not only the private philanthropy funding, but working with countries like Germany and places like the Eastern Tropical Pacific, working with the Global Environment Facility, and so many others to align this. It's going to take every one of us to do it, working with the various stakeholders. So I think there's a real opportunity, a real momentum here to do it. Now, private philanthropy will never be able to pay. Implementing 30 by 30 is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. We cannot do it, and it's not our role to replace governments in any way. But what we can do is try and do innovative things within it. So we can certainly front load it. We can take risks that others can't. We can in some cases look at debt, take on some of the risk out of that. So it's how we use it in a smart way to leverage and to really do it. But we can move very fast on this. I mean, we can mobilize in a matter of weeks, whereas some of the governments and some of the multilaterals and others could take months or years. So we're very excited about trying to do this and committed to trying to figure out how we can work together. But we're here to support the countries in implementing. So I think things like the MBSAP Accelerator, the High Ambition Coalition for People and Nature, all of these are initiatives that are all gearing toward this. I'll wait for the question, but I'm happy to say that we're ready to work with World Bank, with GF, GCF countries, anyone, to do whatever it takes and whatever we can to help with this implementation. Thanks.
And without a delay, straight over to Valerie Hickey from the World Bank.
Thank you, Joe. You know, it's so interesting to listen to this and listen to words like bonds and leverage and capital markets and credit lines, because those were not words that were uttered at Sharm el-Sheikh 4 years ago at the CBD COP, and there were words that still today a lot of people don't actually understand. So I think one of the roles we need to play is to make sure that we build financial literacy in this space, because one of the things I always worry about when we have these discussions is we raise expectations. We start talking about the capital bond market, we start talking about billions of dollars, and the truth is, yes, it's there. There is a potential supply of money. There is a demand for money, but it's a demand that's not represented and articulated in a way that the supply of money can match. So we basically have a big distance between potential supply of money and the real demand for money. And what's interesting, and here I'm going to disagree with my good friend Sandy, when she started and she said countries don't have the space to borrow anymore. Countries have to borrow. They always do. And yes, we're seeing an enormous increase in debt. As you said, 60% of middle-income and low-income countries are at or near debt distress. A huge amount of that money is owed to the private sector, 61% of it. Even in least developing countries, it's 20%. So this isn't debt that's necessarily owed to the public sector. This isn't like it was in the 1980s. But they are willing to borrow for biodiversity. For example, just last year, countries borrowed, and remember we work with poor countries, borrowed $2.5 billion for biodiversity. So countries are willing to borrow, but it all comes down to the cost of capital. If Somalia, where 11 million people are starving, has to borrow, and they have a choice between borrowing to feed those 11 million people or borrowing to protect their landscape, which they know is the key to being able to feed their people not just tomorrow, but in 5 years and 10 years and forever, that's a very hard choice when the price of lending is the same for both things. We need to start bringing down the cost of capital. And this is something that we've been working very effectively with the GEF for years. In fact, that $2.5 billion that we were able to provide for direct biodiversity financing last year was made doable because of GEF grant financing and Pro-Green and Pro-Blue, which are other grant financing mechanisms within the bank. $350 million of that unlocked $2.5 billion from World Bank. That's how we get to scale. It's that idea of leverage that you heard from Yannick and from Christian. And it's interesting how this has happened. So, for example, the first blue bond was made possible because of the GEF. In Seychelles, it was launched in 2018. It took 4 years of planning. And that 4 years of work by the government of Seychelles to create the blue taxonomy, to set up the structures within the Ministry of Finance so they could report back to the creditor who bought the bond, only happened because the GEF was willing to put grant financing behind that. Because sometimes it's about buying down the price of the loan. Sometimes it's about paying for the preparation of the loan, for those things that a government can't afford to pay for. Same thing, the Rhino bond, we've heard about that this week, which is a very innovative way of making sure that scarce public resources are only used to pay for success. It's transferring the risk of failure to the capital markets. It was done because the GEF was willing to support the Zoological Society of London as they were preparing all of the work to figure out where you could do this and how you could do it and how you could measure it. And they were willing to pay the person who bought the Rhino bond if they were successful. That balloon payment, the reason the creditor was willing to buy a Rhino bond was the potential to make more money if there were more rhinos. And the GEF made that possible. And so that's why working together to strategically use grant financing to unlock financing at scale is important. But it's not just on things like the bond market. Yannick, I'm so glad you brought up the idea of credit lines. Because one of the things we love to do in the conservation community is go straight to innovation. But truth is, there's an awful lot of old things, usual things, common things that work really well. And one of them speaks to the irony at the heart of a lot of our discussions these past 2 weeks here, which is we keep reminding everybody that biodiversity holds up half of economic development in the world. It's 50% of economic activity is based on biodiversity. And this is specific. We worked with the Malaysia Central Bank, for example, examined their commercial loan portfolio. 54% of all commercial loans in Malaysia are highly dependent on biodiversity. If something goes wrong with biodiversity, 54% of commercial loans can't be paid back in Malaysia. Think about that. Think about the risk that that entails. And yet, at the same time, we say how important biodiversity is for economic activity. We turn around and act like it's a charity case, like it's not a money-making endeavor. And it is. Look at fisheries. 70 million people alone in sub-Saharan Africa employed through fisheries. Forestry. We looked in Colombia. There's 17 million hectares of degraded land that are suitable for plantations. This is a country, we all know Colombia, that has lots and lots of trees. And yet, you've heard of it, yet they import wood. Think about that. Colombia has to import wood while they have 17 million hectares of land that is suitable for plantations. The reason it isn't planted? Because you can't get a loan for it. Because local banks in Colombia won't recognize natural capital as collateral, and they want repayment in year one. And what do we all know about trees? They take a little while to grow. And so you can't repay that first year. So we need to start working with local banks, not just big capital markets internationally, but local banks to help them change the rules of collateral, to help them change the rules of repayment, so that local biodiversity businesses can become liquid because they are money-making. The final thing I want to say is we really do represent a coalition of the willing. GCF, GEF, World Bank, the other MDBs, the Philanthropic Center, particularly Bezos' big generous contribution, all of the NGOs working in this space. The problem is we can't seem to fit together in a space. Christiane, you said you can move money in weeks. It takes us weeks sometimes to just put a meeting on the calendar. Right? So there's a little bit of a distance in timing. And we have very distinct comparative advantages to play, and yet we don't sit down and we get frustrated with each other, which means that oftentimes the whole of our financing is less than the sum of the parts. And that's why the idea for 30 by 30, which by the way is not just going to take financing within the 30, we need financing for the other 70% too, or we're going to have basically 30% zoos in a big parking lot. That's not going to work. And we need to start sitting together in those spaces, in landscapes where we're working, and really take forward an aid effectiveness agenda, which means it's country-driven. The country decides what they want out of that 30%, how they define success. We're willing to align, as all the various investors, with our different money and create a 20-year funding horizon so that we can stop the start and stop project financing that is eroding so many results and eroding trust, especially among Indigenous peoples and local communities. And in return for that, countries have to start aligning their policies so that the policy environment is encouraging and mandating nature-positive financing and nature-positive action. But we need to pick the landscapes, and we need to be committed to have patience to sit together, figure out how we use our money, use it strategically, and get to the leverage, Christiane, that you were talking about that's so important.
Right, I'm going to just sit here so I don't cause better feedback and catastrophe over there. I mean, I want to pick up on this, on Valerie's ending, because I think that actually should lead into the crux of the discussion that we should probably be having here. We're incredibly lucky to have not only a representative of the largest bilateral investor in biodiversity in the world, but the largest bank facility. We have one of the most innovative financing mechanisms out there in this field, and we have one of the leaders of the most of the philanthropy world here together. The key questions that Valerie is raising is about the complexity and the interrelationships of those. And I'd like to bring that back to this group, because you've all done a fantastic job about highlighting the potential, the facilities, but as Valerie said, it's the interrelationship now to add more than the sum of its parts, which I think is the crucial and really complex area. So I'd like to also come back. I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions, and then if I can come back to you as the audience. And I'm going to have a go at framing, but if you choose to take it and answer more Valerie's, then please do. But Yannick, one of the things that the Green Climate Fund has done recently is recognizing the increasing importance of Indigenous peoples and local communities. You've just congratulations on your new hire at the facility and in your board as well. What do you think are the most important connectivity issues here with some of the groups we're talking about here in order that we can deliver better for IPs, Indigenous peoples and local communities?
Could I first rebound a bit on the point of Valerie, because I fully agree. There are a lot of discussion right now on access and access to GEF resources. Let me reassure you, in Sharm el-Sheikh, it was access to GCF resources, and so it has nothing to do with GEF. The access means a lot of things to different people. For some, it's simplification. For some, it's harmonization. For some, it's speed. For some, it's access to resources at scale. Even if you access very quickly resources, but it's 5 million when you need 500 million, it does not help us. And often you have to impact in order to identify solution. But harmonization is an issue. And speed and scale are also issues. And so one of the things we are trying to do is to leverage the fact that we are a hub of the climate finance architecture, that we work with everybody. We are a co-investor, we do not originate a project, to try to establish some co-investment platforms. And notably, right now, we are working on a co-investment platform for the blue economy in the Caribbean and another one in the Pacific. And there, our ambition is to try to bring all our partners together behind this co-investment platform. And because we are capital agnostic, we will basically close the deal. If World Bank needs that type of money, grant, for example, we provide grant. If Bezos Fund needs equity, we'll provide equity. But it's time indeed that we shift from projects to systemic change, and that we work all of us together. And each of us have comparative advantages that can make it happen. It's definitely not a zero-sum game. On indigenous people, I think it's I would say the most aware audience about the importance of indigenous people when it comes to biodiversity is here in the world. So there is very little I can say that the audience will not know. For example, I was reminded a couple of days ago that in the Amazonia, the places that are under indigenous people control are seven times less likely to be deforested. We will not achieve 30 by 30 without involving indigenous people, because we have to avoid, we have to not only to move from do no harm to leverage the unique comparative advantages. And for me, much more important than financing will be first to get the stewardship of indigenous people to make 30 by 30 happen. On our side, we have made a couple of mistakes in the past. We got slapped on our fingers, and we understood that's much better to start working with those who know the land better than us right from the beginning. And that's the reason why we have established Indigenous People Advisory Group to advise us upstream when we are at the level of the project ID, to go far beyond free consent, but to work at the level of origination.
Thank you very much, Yannick. I'm actually going to ask him as time constraints if just for brief comments on the issues of harmonization and what we can do collectively across those groups, and then we'll take a couple of questions if we can. Thank you, Christian.
But let me start on the IPLC issue because it's critical. I completely agree with you. We will not do 30 by 30 without indigenous peoples and local communities, and we shouldn't. The good news is this is a win-win for everyone. And certainly from the point of the Bezos Earth Fund, which we're focusing on nature and climate solution, but a huge issue and a very important element for us is environmental justice. So we've actually been supporting the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. With the Protect Your Planet Challenge, we've pledged that at least 20%, $1 billion of our funding is going to go specifically to securing tenure rights of communities and their commitment to this. So it's a key issue. I think they're on board. There are legitimate reasons in the past where the conservation community and the indigenous peoples have been at odds. There have been a lot of mistakes made, but this is the moment we can get it right to move forward. So we agree with that, and we're completely on board with that. And on the harmonization, I think, I mean, absolutely. I think your point is right. We all have strengths and complementarities. We're all talking to each other and co-financing in various spaces. But we need to raise ambition here. I mean, to be candid. I mean, we cannot do 30 by 50. This has to be 30 by 30. And we need to get on with it, and we need to mobilize fast, and it is going to require more than we can all do. So I think there's a real opportunity to do this. I think you mentioned private sector, clearly not only private equity, but things like the LEAF Coalition, the opportunities around carbon markets. There's a whole set of issues there that could be mobilized, and if they're done in the right way, in the right places, I think this will get us to a much better place.
Thank you, Christian. Valerie.
So also very quickly on the IPLCs, I think we all agree on the aspiration, and when it comes to biodiversity and climate justice for Indigenous peoples in particular, there's 3 steps we all agree with. One is recognition, that they are the key to unlocking this, that these are their lands, and we only have a lot of biodiversity left because of them. The second is making sure that they have a seat at the table, and I think increasingly everybody has accepted that and everybody has done it. The third, of course, is that they have direct access to finance. And that's where we're failing. Because traditionally, in the biodiversity community world, we have applied a trickle-down finance approach, where we are heavily intermediated. Money goes from us to an NGO, to another NGO, to Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous peoples and local communities are getting pennies on every dollar that's invested in biodiversity. We have to disintermediate the chain. And that means we have to build up Indigenous people and local community organizations. They know how to manage the land. They don't always know how to manage money to the standard we need so that they can access money from investors who have particular demands for fiduciary responsibility. Even, for example, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, which is something that we've invested in with the GEF for many years. It provides financing for biodiversity to Indigenous peoples, local community organizations and NGOs. It provides way more money to NGOs because most Indigenous people and local community organizations don't even have the fiduciary safeguards in place to take a grant of $10,000. So it's our responsibility, and that I think is an especially useful role for philanthropic money because you can move faster, you can take that risk to spend the money building up their administrative capacity. And that's extremely important because we need to stand them up and then stand the intermediaries down so that we can begin to directly finance IPLCs, because that's the third piece of biodiversity justice that we need to deliver on. In terms of harmonization, it's all about paperwork. I mean, at the end of the day, applying for a GCF grant, even applying for a GEF grant, is incredibly difficult, obtuse. It's reams of paper. We've seen we've seen applications that are 80, 100 pages long, and we're asking small island developing states, we're asking least developing countries, we're asking Somalia, where there's 11 million people starving to death, to figure out how to write an 80-page application to get a $3 million grant. This is nonsense. We have to find a way to harmonize the paperwork, to make it simpler, to make it proportional. Because unless we do that, and unless we align the paperwork, so we're all asking the same questions. We have a wonderful agreement with the GEF where they allow us to use regular World Bank paperwork, so we don't have to create separate GEF paperwork. So when we work with the government, it allows us to blend. So I think all of us together have to find a way to simplify our paperwork, because that's what's going to accelerate, and that's what's going to help us match and marry, because our timeframes are different, and they're made worse by this paperwork challenge.
Again, I think I would have been remiss to cut off any of that, because I think it's incredible substance, I think, in all three of those comments. I think it really gets to, for us, the heart of the issue of the interrelationship between these different mechanisms of people, groups that are standing up to commit to the global, the framework. I think the harmonization question is clearly one of the most important ones out there, and I think we got some really definitive answers there about what needs to happen. I want to recognize also in the room here, and thank you for coming, we have representatives of other people key to this discussion. Carla, thank you very much for joining from the EU, a key multilateral here. We also have groups and Conservation Finance Alliance, Biofund, and others. So this has been a fantastic discussion. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Is there any one question that many of the country representatives as well? Any other questions? I'm afraid I can only take one before we get thrown out of here. But I think we all agree it was probably better listening to these answers than Hi, Sean from Biofund.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to make a comment and maybe some suggestions here. And I am from Biofund Mozambique, which is the conservation trust fund there. But I'm actually going to speak on behalf of CAFE, which is the African Environmental Funds Network, which we're part of the board of. And I think one of the tools to get a lot more finance down to the local level is using these local environmental trust funds, which are really innovative things. You look at the MAR Fund, Fundo Mexicano, Fundbiu, the Namibian Fund, and others, who do so much useful work, really embedded in the local realities at the national level. And that's one way to get a lot more finance down a lot faster, and at the same time simplify a lot the rules. The other way to simplify the rules would actually be moving more to results-based finance. So it doesn't matter if those groups can't write a 50-page proposal. If they're producing conservation results on the ground, we can give them money anyway. And that's a way that maybe some of the institutions can start moving away. And I know the World Bank's thinking about doing some of this as well. And that might be another way we can speed up and focus. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was a great intervention and very clear. Does anyone also representing any of the countries here have any questions? Might be able to, very interested in any country responses or questions. If not, we will try to capture a lot of those responses because I think there was an incredible amount of substance again in those. And then that's okay. And I just want to thank particularly that range. Heike has to leave, I'm afraid, but I want to thank her at the first drum, the role of the German government, particularly Yannick and the Green Climate Fund, Valerie and the World Bank, and Christian from the Bezos Earth Fund. I really hope this is a start of what is going to be an incredibly important, whatever happens out of this framework, we know that the commitments made are only going to be effective if some of the points here captured here today by our panelists truly transform into better coordination and making these investments more than the sum of their parts. So I'd like to thank on behalf of us, Valerie, Christian, Yannick, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to you or close. Should we close? It is, I'm afraid, it is on the hour, 1 minute before, and so I thank you all very much. Good luck with the rest of the negotiations. Good luck to our panelists specifically in their contributions to this, and thank you all for attending today.